The number one American vehicle built and made around the world is the Ford F-Series trucks. They're all aluminum. And they buy it from Quebec. Hit those things and I think, you know what, some of that pressure of the self-inflicted harm that they're doing on the U.S. auto sector is starting to finally bubble up.
After months of escalating trade tensions, August 1st marked another sharp turn. Donald Trump's administration raised tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by the USMCA. And this time, steel took center stage. Steel and aluminum now face a 50% levy, the highest among all sectors. It's not the first tariff Canada has faced under Trump, but it's the most economically disruptive and symbolically aggressive. What's different now isn't just the number, it's the target. Steel isn't a fringe export. It's the backbone of Canada's contribution to North America's auto supply chain. And by striking at this core, Trump isn't just pressuring Canada. He's shaking the very structure of his own industrial base.
It was a tremendous impact. I mean, these are customers and distributors we had been dealing with for many, many years. Unfortunately, the threat of the tariffs was enough to create an uncertain business climate. So our American business evaporated essentially overnight in February.
Canada supplies vast amounts of steel and auto parts to U.S. car makers, from chassis frames to precision components. When tariffs climb, Canadian exporters are often the first to feel the squeeze. The Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturers Association reports that exports to the U.S. have already dropped by 25 to 35%, depending on the company. That's not just numbers. Those are lost contracts, idle factories, and laid-off workers. In Toronto, a manufacturer like Conquest Steel experienced a sharp collapse in its U.S. orders earlier this year, not because of actual tariff enforcement, but because of uncertainty. The fear of policy instability alone was enough to freeze cross-border business. Still, rather than retaliate hastily, many in Canada are pivoting. Companies are refocusing on domestic customers, creating new product lines, and investing in long-term manufacturing capacity. Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach isn't about short-term revenge. It's about structural resilience.
I'm listening to Ford and General Motors, who are pivotal in this, starting to say things like, you're burning all of our profit.
Yet as Canadian suppliers reel from the tariffs, the pain isn't stopping at the border. The shock is rippling straight into Detroit. The U.S. auto industry depends on Canadian steel and aluminum, especially for high-volume vehicles like the Ford F-Series, which relies heavily on aluminum from Quebec. As raw material prices rise, so does the cost of assembly. Automakers can't simply switch suppliers overnight. Industry estimates warn that U.S. vehicle prices could rise by several $1,000s depending on the model, materials, and sourcing, with some projections reaching as high as $9,000 in the most tariff-exposed cases. Trump may be aiming at Canada, but the hit is landing in Michigan. This trade move wasn't born from long-term strategy. It was part of a broader performance. Trump imposed a rigid August 1st deadline and challenged countries to accept bilateral deals, many of them thin on structural substance. Canada refused to follow the pattern. While Japan, Korea, and parts of the EU agreed to expedited deals, Canada held its ground. According to Jean Charest, a senior member of Canada's U.S. Relations Council, many of these agreements are already showing signs of strain. Canada chose not to rush, and for good reason. Carney's government made it clear, a bad deal signed under pressure isn't worth the ink.
If the White House does things that are good for Detroit, they're going to be good for Ontario. The problem is they're aiming at everywhere and hitting us all, and they're going to sink important American companies along the way.
Trump's steel tariffs were meant to punish a neighbor, but the consequences may be greater for his own economy. While Canada is adapting, investing inward, and planning beyond the U.S. market, American automakers are locked into a disrupted supply chain with rising costs and no clear off-ramp. This isn't just a bilateral dispute. It's a test of economic leadership, and as the pressure mounts, it's becoming clear. Canada may be taking the hit, but it's America's industrial base that's absorbing the blow.
knee, do not bend the knee. And we have a lot to fight for because we have a lot to offer. We're not some junior partner in this relationship that doesn't have a lot to offer.
Look, Canada's strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away.
At a time when many expected Canada to lash out or fold under pressure, the country is doing something else entirely. It's not reacting emotionally. It's rebuilding deliberately. Just days after President Trump imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered by CUSMA, Prime Minister Mark Carney made it clear. There would be no tit-for-tat escalation, no short-term theatrics. Instead, Canada is focusing inward, realigning its economy, strengthening domestic supply chains, and preparing for a future less dependent on the United States. This isn't just rhetoric. From Vancouver to Ottawa, the Carney government is channeling public frustration into long-term investment, rebuilding infrastructure, expanding value-added sectors, and exploring new trade corridors. It's not a loud response, but it's a determined one.
This is about building up bilateral trade relations between Canada and Mexico at a time when they're facing some pretty significant turbulence from here in Washington. The Trump administration has been talking about striking trade deals with all of its trade partners.
While Canada looks inward, it's also looking south. This week, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Minister Anita Anand are traveling to Mexico City for high-level talks with President Claudia Sheinbaum. The goal is simple: deepen bilateral cooperation. But the timing says more. Both Canada and Mexico missed Trump's August 1st deadline for new bilateral trade deals. Mexico received a 90-day reprieve. Canada did not. That difference is telling, but it hasn't derailed Canada's broader strategy. Mexico and Canada now find themselves on parallel tracks, each navigating the same unpredictable U.S. administration. In 2024, tensions flared when some Canadian leaders proposed cutting Mexico out of USMCA to seek a better deal with the U.S. That move frustrated Mexico, but today, both countries are facing a common challenge. And they're responding not with resentment, but with coordination. What's unfolding in Mexico City this week isn't just about trade. It's about repairing a key relationship and quietly shifting the balance of North American diplomacy. And all of this fits into a broader strategy from Carney, one that avoids reacting to volatility with more volatility. Instead of playing Trump's game of pressure and deadlines, Carney's response has been deeply structural. His approach is rooted in long-term positioning. Rather than seeking temporary tariff relief or concessions, Canada is investing in internal capacity through infrastructure projects, value chain localization, and trade diversification. Carney's message has been consistent. Canada cannot build a resilient economy if it relies on the whims of another country's politics. That message resonates far beyond economics. It speaks to sovereignty, stability, and national direction.
And there is no way that Canada should step down and say, okay, we're willing to take a second-rate deal for the next 3.5 years. That would be unfair to Canadians. That would be unfair to our economy.
This position is not just held at the top. On the ground, local leaders in Canada's most affected regions are echoing the same sentiment. In Windsor, Ontario, home to Canada's auto manufacturing hub, Mayor Drew Dilkens has spoken out against accepting a second-rate deal just to placate Washington. The economic cost is real. In recent weeks, major manufacturers like Stellantis have reported billion-dollar losses, and the added uncertainty from fluctuating tariffs is stalling investment. But the pushback from industry and government hasn't been desperation. It's been resolve. Canada remains at the negotiating table. But it's no longer negotiating from a place of urgency. It's negotiating from a place of strategy. So while Trump tightens the grip, Carney is building bridges, carefully, patiently, and beyond the usual channels. The partnership with Mexico is just one lane in a broader network Canada is rebuilding. It's a move not of isolation, but of insulation, guarding the country against external shocks and asserting its position as an equal in any negotiation. This isn't about Canada resisting for resistance's sake. It's about crafting a different kind of leadership, one that doesn't depend on appeasing the loudest voice, but on making the smartest long-term moves. And in that sense, the real story isn't just about tariffs. It's about who gets to define the rules in the next era of North American trade.
We're working very diligently with Europe, the EU, which covers a lot of territory, a lot of countries. But we haven't really. We don't have a deal with Canada. We haven't been focused on it.
Just days before his self-imposed August 1st deadline, President Donald Trump said it out loud. The U.S. hasn't really been focused on Canada and might not even reach a trade deal. It wasn't just a shrug, it was a statement of disregard. In the middle of high-stakes negotiations, Trump dismissed America's largest trading partner as an afterthought. He hinted Canada could simply pay the tariffs with no real negotiation. To many in Ottawa, this wasn't a threat, it was a signal. Because unlike his approach with Japan or the UK, where pressure was carefully escalated, this moment revealed something else: impatience. And that impatience may have just handed Canada a strategic edge.
Yeah, and the first thing everyone needs to do is exhale, because what the president just said there actually lines up very consistently with what we heard from Canada's negotiators on this.
For weeks, the Canadian government has worked to manage public expectations. Prime Minister Mark Carney, Minister Dominic LeBlanc, and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman have all echoed one message: Canada won't rush into a bad deal. Trump's public remarks ended up confirming that very narrative. When the U.S. president openly admitted a deal may not happen, he gave Canada cover. Now, if talks break down, Ottawa won't take the blame, because Washington walked away first. It's a rare case where silence from Canada was matched by a loud concession from the other side. For Ottawa, that's a communications victory, even without a signed agreement. Trump's comments also put his own trade team in a difficult position. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer have been actively engaging with Canada, describing talks as constructive and productive. LeBlanc has spent days in Washington, meeting with senators and senior officials. Yet, as his own officials were making progress, Trump sent a different message to the world. Negotiations might not matter at all. This internal contradiction weakens the American position. It allows Canadian officials to question who holds the real authority and to slow-walk discussions until a coherent U.S. stance emerges. The more fractured the American message, the more leverage Canada gains. But perhaps the biggest consequence of Trump's remarks won't be felt this week. It'll come in 2026. Under the terms of the USMCA, the agreement must undergo a mandatory review that begins with a Free Trade Commission meeting, expected by late 2025. Trump's team has already signaled plans to use that review to push for stricter origin rules, immigration clauses, and supply chain controls. However, if the U.S. imposes 35% tariffs on Canada now without achieving a negotiated outcome, that strategy may backfire. Canada and Mexico will be able to argue that tariffs have already failed as leverage. Worse, Trump may find himself entering the 2026 review with less credibility and fewer tools. Meanwhile, Canada is preparing its own parallel track, a proposed security and economic agreement to solidify its defense commitments and regional cooperation. That deal, still in early stages, could give Ottawa a new foundation for talks and weaken Trump's ability to dominate the agenda. What looked like a warning may actually be a leak. Trump likely believed he was turning up the pressure. But by speaking too soon and undercutting his own negotiators, he exposed the cracks in his trade strategy. He gave Canada a narrative it can control, a pace it can set, and a reason to delay until the balance shifts. There's still time for a deal, but if there isn't one, it won't just be Canada that pays the price. Trump's own credibility, heading into 2026, may be what gets taxed next.